The air in the park residence smelled of three things: lemon-scented floor polish, the cloying sweetness of Mrs. Park's French perfume, and money, the sharp metallic scent of wealth so old and vast it had become an atmospheric element, clinging to the silk runners and the polished mahogany. For Imani, 9 months pregnant and on her feet for 10 hours, it mostly smelled like survival. She moved through the cavernous foyer, a silent shadow in a plain gray uniform. The fabric, coarse and ill-fitting over the proud swell of her belly, was a constant scratchy reminder of her place. Her skin, the color of dark, rich soil, seemed to absorb the opulent light of the crystal chandelier, rendering her invisible. Her hair was pulled back into a severe bun, a style of ruthless efficiency. She focused on her hands, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on a tablecloth. They were capable hands, clean and lotioned, but the knuckles were dry from cleaning chemicals, and the faint tracery of a scar ran across her right thumb. Her eyes, watchful and intelligent, took in everything: the faint dusting of snow on Mr. Park's cashmere coat, the way the new maid from the Philippines flinched when Mrs. Park's voice carried from the upper floor, the subtle tremor in the butler's hand as he reviewed the guest list for the New Year's Eve party. This house wasn't just a place of employment, it was a gilded cage she had willingly entered, the price of admission, her dignity. Inside a small, worn leather wallet tucked into the pocket of her uniform was a folded ultrasound picture, a grainy, black and white promise. That promise had a price: $18,450. The estimated cost for a safe hospital delivery and the first 6 months of infant care, a figure she had researched with the same meticulous precision she had once applied to corporate fraud investigations. Her savings, squirreled away from her meager salary, stood at $12,600, 6 more months. She just needed 6 more months of invisibility, of swallowing insults, of being less than human. For the life growing inside her, she could endure anything. Her previous life felt like a story told about someone else. A full scholarship to Georgetown, a fast-track analyst position at the State Department's Economic Crimes Division, a fluency in Korean, not the clean academic Seoul dialect, but the rough salt-of-the-earth Busan accent learned at the knee of the man who'd fostered her, a grizzled Korean detective who had taken in a lost black girl and given her a home, a language, and a spine of steel. All of it erased by one catastrophic mistake: trusting the wrong person, becoming the scapegoat for a leak she didn't cause. Blacklisted, disgraced, with her foster father having passed away years ago, she had vanished into the service industry, where no one checked a resume too closely. A ripple of anxiety disturbed the strained calm of the household. Mr. Choi, the perpetually sweating house manager, scurried into the main hall, his hands fluttering like frightened birds. "He is on his way," Mr. Choi whispered, his voice tight with panic. He was addressing the senior staff, but his eyes darted towards Imani, a silent warning. "Chairman Kwan, 10 minutes. Everything must be perfect. Mrs. Park is insistent." The name fell into the opulent silence, heavy and cold. Chairman Kwan Ji-yong. He was Mr. Park's employer, a man who existed in whispers and legends. They said he had built his logistics empire from the docks of Busan with his bare hands. They said he controlled every port on the eastern seaboard. They said he never raised his voice, and that was the most terrifying thing about him. Imani had seen him only twice. He didn't walk, he materialized, flanked by 2 men who were as silent and still as statues. The air itself seemed to defer to him, growing colder, denser. He was a man of controlled physicality, his power emanating not from volume, but from an absolute predatory stillness. Today, he wore a dark tailored suit that probably cost more than Imani's entire savings goal. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe watch, a timepiece so elegant and complex it was less an accessory and more a statement of cosmic authority. Its value could have bought her a house, a car, and a future free from fear. His hair was black, impeccably styled, but it was his eyes that one remembered. They were the last thing you noticed, and the first thing that marked him as dangerous. They were cold, calculating, and missed nothing. Imani continued her work, her movements economical and deliberate. As the staff scrambled, creating a frantic tableau of perfection, she simply continued her task of polishing the silver. She had learned that in a hierarchy of fear, the safest place was at the bottom, utterly beneath notice. The front doors opened without a sound. A gust of frigid December air swirled in, carrying the scent of snow and expensive leather. Kwon Ji-young stood on the threshold. The two silent men who always accompanied him stepped in first, their eyes scanning the room with a professional emptiness that was more unnerving than any open threat. Then, Ji-young entered. Mr. Park, a man who commanded 100 employees with blustering authority, seemed to shrink, his posture curling into one of deference. Mrs. Park, usually a monument of haughty entitlement, forced a brittle, welcoming smile. Ji-young's gaze swept the room, dismissive. He ignored the Park's effusive greetings, his eyes landing on the grand staircase, the art on the walls, the very air itself, as if assessing its quality. He unbuttoned his suit jacket in a single, fluid motion and glanced at his watch. Only then, after establishing his complete dominion over the space, did his eyes drift over the staff. They flickered past the butler, the maids, and for a fraction of a second, they passed over Imani. It was a gaze utterly devoid of recognition. She was a fixture, a part of the furniture, and for that, she was grateful. This was the world, polished, cold, and cruel. Tonight, the New Year's Eve party would begin. The champagne would flow. The laughter would be as fake as the pearls on Mrs. Park's neck. And Imani would count the hours until she could retreat to her small, cold room and add another day's earnings to the future of her child. Survival was a game of inches and hours. The party was a symphony of manufactured joy. Crystal glasses clinked, a string quartet played Vivaldi with bland precision, and the air grew thick with forced laughter and expensive cologne. Imani moved through it all on silent feet, her tray a shield, her face a neutral mask. She collected empty glasses, offered canapes, and refilled champagne flutes, her pregnant form an inconvenient truth in a room dedicated to fantasy. Mrs. Park was holding court near the massive stone fireplace, her voice a shrill performance of social grace. She wore a gown of screaming red silk, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat like a collar of ice. Every few minutes, her eyes would find Imani, a flicker of irritation crossing her features, as if Imani's very presence was a personal affront. The inciting incident, when it came, was small, almost absurd. A sapphire earring. A family heirloom, Mrs. Park declared, suddenly frantic. She'd been wearing it just an hour ago. She patted her earlobe, her neck, her hands fluttering in theatrical distress. "It's gone!" Her voice cut through the polite murmur of the party. "My great-grandmother's earring. It's gone." Mr. Park rushed to her side, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. The guests fell silent, an audience sensing the curtain rising on an unscheduled drama. Mrs. Park's eyes, sharp and malicious, scanned the room and landed, with predatory certainty, on Imani. "You," she said, her voice dropping, gaining a venomous weight. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger, the diamond on her ring catching the light. "You were just clearing the glasses from this table." A collective intake of breath, the string quartet faltered, a single violin note dying in the sudden, absolute silence. Imani stood perfectly still. Her tray, laden with delicate champagne flutes, was steady in her hands. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice was quiet, deferential. "I saw you." Mrs. Park's voice rose, gaining confidence from Imani's stillness. "You were hovering. You probably thought no one would notice." It was a lie, a bald, vicious lie. Imani had been on the other side of the room, assisting a guest who had spilled wine on his jacket. Several people had seen her, but no one spoke. The guests looked away, suddenly fascinated by their shoes, the ceiling, the ice melting in their glasses. The staff froze, their faces pale with shared terror. To defend Imani was to become the next target. "I did not take your earring, Mrs. Park," Imani said. The words were simple, factual. She kept her gaze respectfully lowered. "A thief and a liar," Mrs. Park spat. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides. Her face was a contorted mask of rage. "Do you know how much that is worth? More than you'll make in a lifetime of scrubbing floors, you filthy." She let the racial slur hang in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone. Imani's gaze remained on the floor. The polished marble reflected the glittering lights of the Christmas tree. In its distorted surface, she saw her options shrink to a single point. Dignity versus survival. An apartment and a future for her child versus this moment of public crucifixion. The baby inside her gave a soft, rolling kick, a reminder of the stakes: survival. "I'm going to have you searched," Mrs. Park declared, reaching for Imani's uniform. Instinct, buried deep and long suppressed, flared in Imani. Her body tensed. A voice in her head, the voice of her foster father, barked a single command in Korean: "Biomalji, don't move, don't react, let the wave break over you." She held herself rigid, a statue of compliance. But as Mrs. Park's hand grabbed the fabric of her pocket, her other hand shot out and knocked the tray from Imani's grasp. The crash was explosive. Champagne flutes shattered on the marble floor, a cascade of crystal and golden liquid. The sound broke the spell of silence. A woman gasped. "Look what you've done!" Mrs. Park shrieked, pulling her hand back as if burned. "Incompetent! Clumsy!" She was losing control, her performance tipping into genuine hysteria. She needed a finale. Her eyes, wild and hateful, fixed on the front door. The snow was coming down harder now, a thick white curtain against the black night. "Get out!" Mrs. Park's voice was a low, shaking command. "Get out of my house! Now!" Mr. Choi, the house manager, took a half step forward, his mouth opening to protest. "Mrs. Park, please. It is freezing. She has no coat, and her condition—" "Did I ask for your opinion, Choi?" Mrs. Park wheeled on him. "Do you want to join her? I want this thing out of my sight. Her employment is terminated." No one else moved. This was the abyss, the line between spectator and participant, and no one was willing to cross it. Two security guards, their faces impassive, moved towards Imani. They did not touch her, but their presence was a wall. "Ma'am, my personal belongings are in my room," Imani said, her voice miraculously steady, her wallet, her savings, the ultrasound picture. "I'll have them burned," Mrs. Park said, her smile a slash of red against her pale face. "Consider it a severance package." "Now, get out!" The guards opened the heavy front door. The wind howled into the warmth of the hall, a blast of Arctic cold that felt like a physical blow. It carried the sound of distant sirens and the faint tinny chime of a church bell marking the approach of the new year. Imani looked at Mrs. Park, truly looked at her for the first time. She lifted her chin, and her eyes, no longer deferential, were clear and cold. For 3 seconds, she said nothing. 3 seconds where she memorized the woman's face. 3 seconds where she sealed the memory of this humiliation, this cruelty, not as a wound, but as an affidavit, a debt that would be collected. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the opulent house. She did not look back. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, the sound definitive, the warmth, the light, the cloying scent of money and perfume. All gone. She was alone, on a private gated road in the middle of a blizzard on New Year's Eve. Heavily pregnant, wearing a thin cotton uniform, with no coat, no money, and nowhere to go. The cold was immediate, a shocking, violent embrace. It stole her breath, seeping through the cheap fabric of her uniform, biting at her skin. Snowflakes melted on her face like icy tears. The world dissolved into a swirl of white and a howling wind that sounded like the world's end. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Panic was a luxury. It burned calories she couldn't spare. She wrapped her arms around her belly, a primal, protective gesture. The baby was her anchor, her purpose. She had one chance, a burner phone tucked into the waistband of her uniform, a cheap, untraceable device she kept for emergencies. Its battery was low. Her fingers, already stiffening with cold, fumbled to retrieve it. The screen glowed, a small, hopeful light in the maelstrom. There was one number she could call. Not family. She had none. Not friends. Her old life was buried too deep. But there was Grace, a former waitress she'd worked with at a diner 2 years ago, another woman living on the margins. They had a pact. If things went bad, truly bad, they were each other's lifeline. Her fingers were numb, clumsy. Shivering violently, she tried to punch in the number she knew by heart. She squinted at the screen through the driving snow, the numbers blurring. Did she press a 7 or an 8? She wasn't sure. She hit send. The text was simple, a desperate flare sent into the darkness. "Grace, it's Imani. I'm in trouble. Can you help?" She waited, huddled against the stone gatepost of the park estate, the cold, a living thing, gnawing at her. A minute passed. 2. The phone screen went dark. Battery dead. A wave of utter despair washed over her. It was over. She had failed. She had played the game of survival and lost. She closed her eyes, the image of the ultrasound picture burning in her mind. I'm sorry, she thought, a prayer to the child she would never meet. Miles away, in a penthouse apartment that overlooked the city like a hawk's nest, Kwon Ji-young sat in a single pool of light. The room was Spartan, furnished with dark wood, leather, and silence. A half-empty glass of scotch sat on the table beside him. The city's fireworks began to bloom against the black sky, silent explosions of color through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He ignored them. His private phone, a device whose number was known to less than a dozen people, vibrated on the polished table. A text from an unknown number. His security protocols were absolute. Any unrecognized contact was a potential threat. He would normally have his team trace and neutralize it within minutes. But he glanced at the screen. Grace, it's Imani. I'm in trouble. Can you help? Imani. The name was vaguely familiar. A maid? A caterer? He sifted through the vast, organized files of his memory. The park's house. The silent, pregnant black woman. The one who moved with a stillness that didn't belong in a servant. The one whose eyes, for a fleeting second, had not been cowed. Why was she texting him? Who was Grace? He ran the name through his internal database. No one of significance. A misdial. It had to be a misdial, a desperate, foolish mistake. His thumb hovered over the button to forward the text to his security chief. Standard procedure. The source would be located, assessed, and forgotten. He didn't press it. Something in the simple, desperate plea snagged on his conscience. I'm in trouble. He had been at the park's residence less than 2 hours ago. He remembered the tension, the brittle edge to Mrs. Park's voice. He remembered the pregnant maid, a figure of quiet dignity in a house devoid of it. He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the snow-swept city. On a night of celebration, a woman was in trouble. A misdial had made it his problem, or, more accurately, his choice. The code he lived by, a brutal but unwavering set of principles forged in the back alleys of Busan, was clear. You do not let the wolves prey on the helpless in your territory. And the parks, for all their pretensions, were his territory. He picked up his phone and dialed his head of security. Kang, his voice was quiet, devoid of emotion. I have a number, unknown caller, ping her location, now. He read the number from the text. Sir? Kang's voice was laced with confusion. Standard procedure is... The procedure has changed, Ji-young cut him off. Find her, send me the location, prepare a vehicle, and have a medical team on standby. Move. He hung up. He looked back at the text message. Imani. Her mistake had been to text the wrong number. Her salvation, or her end, would be that the number belonged to him. The location came through less than a minute later. A GPS coordinate just outside the gates of the park estate. Ji-young's face, usually an impassive mask, hardened. The pieces clicked into place. The party, Mrs. Park's volatile temper, the blizzard. He grabbed his coat. As he strode towards the door, his 2 ever-present guards fell into step behind him. The silent question in their eyes was one he didn't need to answer. Someone had broken a rule. Someone would pay. The black sedan cut through the snow-choked streets with silent efficiency. Ji-young sat in the back, the city lights a blur. The GPS tracker on his screen showed them closing in. He stared at the blinking red dot. A life, reduced to a signal in a storm. They found her slumped against the stone pillar of the gate, a dark shape nearly lost in the swirling white. She was no longer moving. For a terrible second, he thought they were too late. The car slid to a halt. Before the driver had fully stopped, Ji-young was out the door, the frigid wind tearing at his coat. He knelt beside her, his movements swift and sure. He brushed the snow from her face. Her skin was shockingly cold, her lips tinged with blue, but a faint mist of breath escaped them. She was alive. He didn't hesitate. He shrugged off his own cashmere coat, a garment worth thousands, and wrapped it around her small, trembling form. He gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, but dense with the precious weight of 2 lives. As he lifted her, her head lolled against his chest, a sigh of surrender escaping her lips. He carried her to the car, the driving snow clinging to his suit. His guards opened the door, their faces grim. He laid her gently across the back seat, tucking the coat more securely around her. "To the safe house," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "And get Dr. Kim on the line. Tell her it's code Onyx." As the car pulled away, leaving the opulent, brightly lit prison of the Park estate behind, Ji-young looked down at the woman whose life had so strangely collided with his. Her face, even in unconsciousness, held a profound, unshakable dignity. Her mistaken text had been an act of desperation. His response was an act of something else entirely, an assertion of order, a balancing of scales, and, though he would never admit it, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like compassion. The new year had begun, and for Imani, everything had just changed. The safe house was the antithesis of the Park mansion. It was anonymous, modern, and ruthlessly functional. The air smelled of clean linen, antiseptic, and brewing barley tea. Imani woke slowly, the first sensation a deep, penetrating warmth. She was lying in a large bed, tucked under a heavy down comforter. An EAV line was taped neatly to the back of her hand, feeding a clear, warm fluid into her veins. A woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair was checking her pulse. She smiled gently. "Welcome back. You gave us quite a scare. I'm Dr. Kim." Imani's first thought was for her baby. She placed a hand on her belly, a frantic, searching gesture. "Your baby is fine," Dr. Kim said, anticipating the fear. "Strong heartbeat. You, on the other hand, had severe hypothermia. Another 30 minutes out there. Well, let's not think about that. You're safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign. Imani's memory returned in a rush. The party, the earring, Mrs. Park's venomous face, the slam of the door, the crushing absolute cold, and then nothing. "How did I get here?" she whispered, her throat raw. Before the doctor could answer, the door opened. Kwon Ji-young entered. He had changed from his suit into a simple black sweater and dark trousers. He held a cup of steaming tea. He dismissed the doctor with a slight inclination of his head. She gathered her things and left, closing the door softly behind her. They were alone. The silence in the room was vast and heavy. Ji-young pulled a chair to the bedside, his movements deliberate. He placed the tea on the nightstand. "You texted me by mistake," he stated. It wasn't a question. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs. The burner phone. The wrong number. Of all the catastrophic errors she could have made, this was the worst. She had sent a distress signal directly to the apex predator at the top of the food chain. I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice barely audible. "My fingers were cold. I was trying to reach a friend." He watched her, his expression unreadable. His eyes were like dark, polished stones. "Your friend's name is Grace." Another statement. He knew. Of course, he knew. "Yes, sir." "My name is not Grace," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "No, sir?" Fear, sharp and cold, began to replace the warmth of the bed. What did he want? Why bring her here? A man like him did nothing without a reason, and his reasons were seldom kind. "Mrs. Park terminated your employment," he continued, his voice level. "She threw you out into a blizzard, without a coat, while you were carrying a child." He recited the facts as if they were items on a balance sheet. Imani said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Mr. Park is my subordinate," Ji-young said, his gaze sharpening. "His household's actions reflect on my organization. This incident is a loose end, an inefficiency." A loose end? That's what she was. Not a person, not a victim. A complication in his otherwise orderly world. "I apologize for any trouble I've caused, sir," she said, falling back on the familiar language of deference. "I will disappear. You will never hear from me again." He was silent for a long moment, studying her face. "Disappearing is not as easy as you think," he said quietly. "Especially not for you. They will look for you. Mrs. Park cannot afford a witness to her. Lack of judgment. And Mr. Park cannot afford the liability." A cold dread settled in Imani's stomach. He was right. They wouldn't just let her go. They would want to ensure her silence was permanent. "What do you want from me?" she asked, the deferential "sir" falling away. Her voice was stronger now. He leaned forward slightly. "For now, I want you to rest, to recover. Dr. Kim will monitor you and the baby. You are safe here. No one can reach you." "And after?" "After," he said, "we will see." 2 days passed. Imani's strength returned. The staff at the safe house were professional and distant, treating her with a detached respect that was more comforting than any false sympathy. They called her Ms. Imani. She had a room, clothes that fit, and nourishing food. And for the first time in a year, she slept without fear. On the 3rd day, Ji-young informed her that Mr. Park would be arriving. "He has requested a meeting to discuss a sensitive business matter," Ji-young said, his eyes holding hers. "I have granted it. I want you to be present." "Why?" "He believes you froze to death," Ji-young replied, his voice cold as steel. "He has been creative in his accounting to cover the costs of your disposal. I am interested to hear his explanation." When Mr. Park was shown into the minimalist living area, he was a portrait of obsequious terror. He bowed low to Ji-young, his face slick with sweat. He did not even see Imani, sitting quietly in a chair in the corner of the room, partially obscured by a large plant. "Chairman Kwon," he began, his voice trembling. "Thank you for seeing me. There is a small discrepancy in the Q4 logistics budget I wish to clarify personally." Ji-young gestured for him to continue, his face impassive. Mr. Park launched into a convoluted explanation, his words tumbling over one another. He spoke in Korean, a rapid-fire stream of corporate jargon and excuses, clearly assuming it would create a cone of privacy, excluding the black woman in the corner who was, to him, nothing more than furniture. He spoke of unexpected disposal fees, sanitation contracts, and a terminated asset write-off, all euphemisms for making a pregnant maid disappear. Imani listened, her expression unchanging. The numbers he quoted, the shell companies he named, she recognized the patterns. It was the same sloppy, arrogant fraud she had seen 100 times in her old life. He was skimming, but he was also trying to bury the cost of a murder he thought his wife had committed. He finished his pathetic speech, looking at Ji-young with pleading eyes, praying for absolution. The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched for 10 seconds. 20. Then Imani spoke. Her voice, clear and calm, cut through the silence like glass. She spoke in Korean, not the clean, formal dialect of Seoul, but the rough, rhythmic cadence of Busan, the language of dock workers and fishermen, the language of Ji-young's own childhood. "The sanitation contract you mentioned with Busan Clean Seas," she said, her accent flawless. "That's a shell corporation. It was flagged by the Financial Services Commission 2 years ago. Its sole director is your wife's cousin." Mr. Park froze. His head snapped around, his eyes widening in horror as he finally truly saw her. It was as if he had seen a ghost. The color drained from his face. Imani continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "And the disposal fee you allocated to the Cheongjin Port project? That's not a write-off. You wired it to a private account in the Cayman Islands, an account I can give Chairman Kwon the number for, if he's interested." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking with his. "You're not just a clumsy embezzler, Mr. Park. You're a stupid one." The reversal was total. The power in the room, which had been consolidated entirely in Ji-young, had now shifted, flowing towards the pregnant black woman in the corner chair. Mr. Park began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. You speak Korean?" he stammered, the question absurd in its inadequacy. "Just a maid with good ears," Imani said, the mic drop line landing in the dead quiet. Ji-young had not moved. He hadn't flinched, but his eyes, fixed on Imani, held a new light. It was not surprise. It was recognition. He had suspected there was more to her. Now he knew. The loose end had just become his most valuable asset. He turned his cold gaze back to the quivering Mr. Park. "Kang," Ji-young said, his voice deadly quiet. 2 doors opened, and his silent guards entered the room. Mr. Park collapsed to his knees. "Chairman, please. It was my wife. She is insane. I was just trying to clean up her mess." Ji-young looked from the groveling man on the floor to Imani. He did not give an order. He simply waited. This was her play. Imani looked down at Mr. Park, at this pathetic, sweating man who had stood by and watched as his wife condemned her and her unborn child to death in a blizzard. There was no pity in her eyes, only judgment. "Not his entire household," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a death sentence. Ji-young gave a curt nod to his men. They lifted Mr. Park to his feet. The man was sobbing now, incoherent pleas bubbling from his lips. They dragged him from the room. The door closed. The silence returned. Imani took a slow, deep breath. The mask was off. The maid was gone. In her place was someone else, someone they had never seen coming. Ji-young finally spoke. "Georgetown, State Department Economic Crimes Division, Analyst First Class, honorable discharge that was anything but. Your foster father was Detective Choi Min-jun of the Busan Metropolitan Police." She met his gaze without flinching. He hadn't asked. He had stated. He had used the past 2 days well. "You have been busy," she said. "I am a careful man," he replied. "I don't like surprises." He paused, his eyes traveling to her belly and then back to her face. "The Parks are a symptom of a larger disease within my organization, a rot I allowed to grow in the dark. You have a unique perspective. You have seen the rot from the inside." "What do you want, Chairman Kwan?" Imani asked again. This time, it was a question between equals. "I want the rot cut out," he said. "All of it. The Parks are just the beginning. Their greed has exposed my organization to federal interest. You prevented a catastrophic blow today. Your analysis saved me from a vulnerability I never would have seen." This was his version of a thank you. "I am offering you a trade. Your expertise for my resources, your safety and the safety of your child will be absolute. In return, you will help me clean my house." It was not a rescue. It was a contract, an alliance forged in betrayal and mutual interest. She was not his charity case. She was his weapon. "I'll need unrestricted access to all your financial records," she said, her voice crisp, professional. The analyst was back, and a secure terminal, full autonomy. "Done," he said without hesitation. "And when this is over," she added, her voice hardening, "Mrs. Park, she is mine." Kwon Ji-young looked at the woman before him. The quiet maid had vanished, replaced by a queen facing down a hostile world. He saw the steel in her spine, the fire in her eyes, and the brilliant calculating mind working behind them. "She is yours," he agreed. A rare, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Welcome to the team, Miss Imani." The war began not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a server. In a new safe house, a minimalist apartment high above the city, Imani sat before a bank of monitors. Ji-young had been true to his word. She had been given a fortress, protected by his most trusted men, and a digital key to his entire empire. For the first week, she worked alone. Ji-young never visited, never called. He simply provided. Food appeared. A state-of-the-art ergonomic chair to support her back was delivered. Prenatal vitamins and a selection of herbal teas recommended by Dr. Kim were stocked in the kitchen. It was his way. Protection expressed through logistics, care through quiet provision. Imani plunged into the data streams. She slept in 4-hour shifts, her mind alive, chasing numbers through shell corporations, offshore accounts, and encrypted ledgers. The park's petty embezzlement was just the tip of a terrifying iceberg. They were the brokers for a human trafficking ring, using Ji-young's legitimate shipping containers to move people as if they were cargo. They funneled the profits through dozens of small businesses, nail salons, restaurants, cleaning services, laundering the blood money into the legitimate economy, into Ji-young's economy. The rot was deeper and more venomous than either of them had imagined. It implicated city officials, port authorities, and at least 2 of Ji-young's senior lieutenants. The discovery left Imani cold. This wasn't just about revenge against Mrs. Park anymore. This was about dismantling an entire ecosystem of human misery that had flourished under the cover of Ji-young's power. One evening, staring at a manifest that listed textiles for a container whose thermal signature showed it was full of living people, she felt a wave of nausea. The baby kicked, a sharp jab to her ribs. This was why she was doing this. To build a world where her child wouldn't be a commodity. A world where the powerful couldn't just throw people away. She sent her initial findings to Jiang in a heavily encrypted file. His response was a single word: proceed. The first countermove from the enemy came 2 days later. Mrs. Park, driven by a cocktail of paranoia and rage, had not stopped looking for the maid who had vanished. Unable to find Imani, she went after the next best thing. Imani's phone, a new, secure one provided by Jiang, rang. It was an unknown number, but the caller ID showed a name: Grace. Her heart seized. Imani? Oh God, Imani, is that you? Grace's voice was thin with terror. There are men here. They're asking about you. They said if I didn't tell them where you are, they're going to plant drugs in my apartment and call the police. My son. Imani's blood ran cold. They were targeting her past, her one fragile connection to a life before the Parks. Listen to me, Grace. Imani's voice was calm, commanding. Do exactly as I say. Tell them you haven't heard from me in months. You think I left the state. Cry. Sound convincing. I'm handling this. Do you understand? Okay, Imani. Okay. Imani hung up and immediately dialed Kong, Jiang's security chief. She didn't wait for pleasantries. Grace Miller, 43B Orchard Street, apartment 3C. Mrs. Park's men are there, threatening her and her son. Neutralize the threat and get them out. Move them to a secure location, now. She had issued an order to Jiang's top man as if she were his equal. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then, a simple, "Yes, ma'am." Imani hung up, her hands shaking. This was the escalation. The fight was no longer just about numbers on a screen. Mrs. Park had crossed the line. She had threatened a child. That night, Jiang appeared at her door. He didn't speak, just handed her a tablet. It showed a live feed from a warehouse. 2 of Mrs. Park's thugs were tied to chairs. Kang stood before them, his expression grim. They talked, Jiang said, his voice flat. Grace and her son are safe. They are on a flight to a new life, with enough money to start over. A gift. From you. Imani looked at the screen, then at Jiang. This was a message. They know I'm alive and that I'm protected. Yes, he said. Which means their next move will be more direct. He was right. A week later, as Imani was being driven to a clandestine meeting with a port informant she had cultivated, their armored car was ambushed. 2 black SUVs boxed them in. A screech of tires and the ugly slam of metal on metal. Men with guns poured out. Her security detail reacted instantly, returning fire. But they were pinned down. One of the drivers was hit. The car's engine was dead. "We have to move," the lead guard shouted over the gunfire. "The alley!" It was a kill box, a narrow alley with no exit. Jiang's men were good, but they were outnumbered. Imani's mind raced, processing angles, exits, probabilities. She had studied the schematics of this entire district. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Not the alley, the laundromat, 2 doors down." "Ma'am, that's a fortified storefront. We can't get in," the guard argued. "The back door opens onto the service tunnels for the steam pipes," she countered, her voice sharp with authority. "The lock is a standard K7 commercial model. I know how to bypass it. The tunnels will take us 2 blocks east to the subway. It's our only way out. Go, now." It was a direct contradiction of his tactical assessment. The guard hesitated for a split second, looking at this pregnant woman giving him orders in the middle of a firefight. But there was an absolute certainty in her voice, the authority of someone who knew the terrain better than he did. He made a decision. "Go! Go! To the laundromat!" he yelled to his men. They laid down covering fire, a desperate volley of bullets that gave them the 3 seconds they needed. They half-dragged, half-carried her out of the car and sprinted for the laundromat. The back room was chaos. She directed one of the guards, telling him exactly where to apply pressure on the lock mechanism. It clicked open. They plunged into the hot, dark, steam-filled tunnel just as bullets ripped through the door where they had been standing. They emerged into the indifferent bustle of a subway station, melting into the crowd. Safe. That night, Jiang stood before her, his face carved from stone. One of his men was dead. 2 were wounded. "Your plan was reckless," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your plan would have gotten us all killed," she retorted without flinching. She was not his subordinate to be reprimanded. She was his partner. "The intel for the ambush came from inside your organization. One of the 2 lieutenants I flagged. They are selling you out." She pushed a file across the table. The trafficking, the ambush, it all leads to one man, Director Cho. He's been working with the Parks from the beginning. Ji-young stared at the file, then at her. He had planned a slow, careful excision of the rot, a quiet war fought in the shadows. "They tried to kill me, Ji-young," Imani said, her voice low and intense. She used his name for the first time, a deliberate breach of protocol. "They tried to kill our child." She placed a hand on her stomach. The hour hung in the air between them, a word of profound and shocking intimacy. It wasn't a romantic claim, it was a statement of fact. Her child's fate was now inextricably linked to his. "This quiet war of yours isn't working. It's time to end this, publicly and permanently." "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice softer now. "The mayor's annual charity gala," she said. "In 3 weeks, the crowning event of the social season. The Parks will be there, Director Cho will be there, everyone will be there. That's where we'll do it. Not in some dark alley, but in the light, where everyone can see." She laid out the plan. It was audacious, complex, and brilliant. It wasn't just about exposing their crimes. It was about using the very system of social hierarchy they revered to utterly destroy them. It was a plan born of an analyst's mind, honed by a survivor's instinct. Ji-young listened, his head tilted. She was right. His methods were for a different kind of enemy. The Parks and their ilk dealt in public perception, in social currency. They had to be destroyed in that arena. He, a creature of the shadows, could not have conceived of such a plan, but she could. "I will overrule you on one point," she said, her gaze steady. "Mrs. Park, no guards, no screens playing evidence, just me, face to face." He looked at her for a long time, at the unyielding strength in her eyes, the fierce protective love for the child she carried. He saw the survivor, the analyst, the strategist. He saw his equal. "The platform is yours," he said. It was the ultimate concession. He was giving her his power, his name, his entire infrastructure, to use as she saw fit. He was no longer the protector and she the protected. They were allies, and they were going to war. The night of the mayor's charity gala, the grand ballroom of the city's oldest hotel, was a galaxy of artificial stars. Diamonds glittered, champagne flowed, and the air hummed with the self-congratulatory buzz of the city's elite. Mrs. Park was in her element. She wore a gown of shimmering gold, her laughter loud and brittle as she held court. Her husband, Mr. Park, having somehow survived Ji-young's initial purge by offering up Director Cho as the sole traitor, stood by her side, his face a pasty mask of anxiety. They were projecting an image of untouchable power, of a minor scandal weathered and forgotten. Mrs. Park felt triumphant. The troublesome maid was a ghost, a bad memory long since buried. Then the ballroom doors opened, and the murmuring stopped. Imani entered. She was not a ghost. She was a vision. She wore a custom-made gown of deep sapphire blue silk that fell in graceful lines over her heavily pregnant form, celebrating it rather than hiding it. A simple, elegant diamond pendant, a gift from Ji-young, left on her dresser with no note, rested at her throat. Her hair was styled in a regal upsweep, and her face, expertly made up, was serene and commanding. She was flanked not by guards, but by Kwon Ji-young himself. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his presence a vortex of silent authority that bent the atmosphere of the entire room. He was not her protector. He was her consort. They moved into the room, and the crowd parted before them, like the sea before a king. Whispers followed in their wake. Who was she? The beautiful, pregnant black woman on the arm of the city's most feared and reclusive power broker. Mrs. Park saw her. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor, the sound lost in the sudden, collective gasp of the room. Her face, a moment ago flushed with triumph, turned the color of ash. The blood drained from it, leaving a grotesque mask of shock and terror. "You," she breathed, the word a ragged, disbelieving hiss. Imani and Ji-young stopped a few feet from her. Ji-young gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and then stepped back, melting into the periphery. This was Imani's stage. Imani met Mrs. Park's gaze. The reversal was complete. The last time they had faced each other, Imani had been in a cheap uniform, head bowed, enduring humiliation. Now she stood before her tormentor as an equal, a figure of grace and power. "Hello, Mrs. Park." Imani's voice was calm, conversational, yet it carried across the silent ballroom. "You look surprised to see me. I suppose you thought I wouldn't be able to make it." "Mister." Park tried to step forward to bluster his way through. "What is the meaning of this? Who let you in here? Security!" Imani's eyes flickered to him, cold and dismissive. "Your security guards are otherwise engaged, Mr. Park, as are your assets in the Cayman Islands." He flinched as if struck. Imani turned her attention back to the woman who had cast her out into the snow. "You tried to kill me," she said, the words simple, factual, and devastating. "You tried to kill my child, all for a sapphire earring." Imani reached into a small silk clutch. For a moment, Mrs. Park thought she was pulling out a weapon. Instead, Imani produced the earring. It glittered under the chandeliers. "I found it later that night," Imani said. "It had fallen into the cuff of your husband's trousers when you embraced him. You were so busy performing your outrage, you never even bothered to look." She let the implication hang in the air. The entire public humiliation, the near-death sentence, it had all been for nothing, a fiction of Mrs. Park's own making. Mrs. Park stared at the earring, then at Imani, her mind refusing to process the reality before her. "Liar," she whispered. "You're a thief, a nobody." "Am I?" Imani replied, her voice still quiet. "I know that for the past 3 years, you've been using your family's charitable foundation, the New Hope Fund, as a front. Not to help orphans, but to launder the profits from selling them. I know that container 7B-881, listed as carrying medical supplies, is currently docked at Pier 4, and I know it doesn't contain medical supplies. It contains 12 children from North Korea waiting to be sold." Every detail was a hammer blow. Mrs. Park began to shake, her eyes darting around for an escape that wasn't there. The entire room was watching, frozen. "You're insane," she hissed, trying to grasp for some semblance of control. "You have no proof." "That's where you're wrong," Imani said. At that exact moment, every phone in the ballroom buzzed. A single encrypted link had been sent to every guest, every journalist, every city official present. The link led to a meticulously organized file: bank records, shipping manifests, wiretap transcripts, video surveillance. An irrefutable mountain of evidence detailing the Park's trafficking empire, curated by Imani herself. Mrs. Park's face crumpled. The performance was over. All that was left was raw, pathetic terror. She lunged forward, not to attack, but to plead. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. She tried to grab Imani's arm. "Please, don't do this. We can make a deal. I'll give you anything. Money." Imani took a step back, her expression unyielding. She looked down at this woman, now groveling at her feet, and felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. This was not about hatred. This was about justice, a balancing of the books. "You had nothing I wanted," Imani said, her voice a final judgment. "And now, you have nothing at all." She turned her back on the weeping woman. As if on cue, uniformed federal agents entered the ballroom from every entrance. They did not rush. They moved with the calm certainty of a cleanup crew, arriving after the battle has already been won. They surrounded Mr. and Mrs. Park, who seemed to shrink under the weight of 100 phone cameras capturing their utter ruin. Imani walked away, not looking back. Jeong fell into step beside her. He said nothing, but his presence was a shield. As they passed the bar, he picked up 2 glasses of water and handed one to her. Their fingers brushed. It was the first time they had touched since he had carried her from the snow. The contact was brief, electric. A universe of unspoken understanding passed between them. She had done it. She had faced the monster and, with her own hands, her own mind, she had torn it down. 6 months later, the sun streamed into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city harbor. The air smelled of fresh paint, new leather, and baby powder. Imani sat behind a large desk, not of mahogany, but of light, modern maple. She bounced her daughter, a beautiful, healthy baby named Hope, on her knee while reviewing a compliance report on a tablet. She was no longer an analyst or a consultant. She was the head of the new Quan Global Compliance and Ethics Division. Her job was to drag Jeong's empire, kicking and screaming into the light. It was a Herculean task, but it was hers. She had earned it. The door opened and Jeong entered. He looked at the baby, his usual cold expression softening for a fraction of a second. Hope gurgled, reaching a tiny hand towards him. He didn't take it, but a rare small smile touched his lips, a smile so faint that only someone who had studied his face for months would have noticed it. He placed a single heavy folder on her desk. The auction was finalized this morning. Imani opened it. Inside was the deed to a sprawling estate on the city's most exclusive stretch of coastline. Impeccably landscaped grounds, a view of the ocean, a house filled with light. It was the former park residence, seized and sold by the government. The deed was in a new name, Hope Imani Choi, her foster father's name. A legacy restored. It was the ultimate symbolic transfer. The place of her deepest humiliation was now her child's birthright. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. There were no words for this. No thank yous could suffice. Their relationship existed beyond language, in the realm of action and mutual respect. He had provided the platform. She had delivered the justice. They had saved each other. The shipping subsidiary in Singapore is still showing irregularities, she said, her voice soft, but all business. I think we have another rat. He nodded, accepting the change in topic. This was their language. Work, purpose, the quiet, steady building of a new world on the ashes of the old one. He was her partner. She was his conscience. And together, they were a force of nature. She looked from the deed to her daughter, to the man standing before her. She was home, not in a place, but in a state of being, fully seen, fully valued, and finally undeniably free. What would you have done? If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more.